Hello everyone and welcome to ECO232. In this video, we will be covering Chapter 1 of the module. Chapter 1 will take you on a macroeconomic tour of the world. It starts with looking at the economic crisis that has dominated the world economy since the late 2000s. The tour stops at each of the world's major economic powers, namely the United States, the Euro area, as well as China, and we will also consider the South African economy. So what is macroeconomics? Macroeconomics studies aggregate economics and looks at the economic system as a whole. The topics will include total production, income, expenditure, economic growth, aggregate employment and unemployment, price levels and inflation, and the balance of payments. Introduction, a tour of the world. The aim of this chapter is to provide some general description of macroeconomic conditions around the world and provide a short introduction to the 2007-2008 financial crisis. The crisis, pre-crisis growth levels. From 2000 to 2007, the world economy had a sustained expansion. Advanced economies were growing at an average of 2.6% per year. Emerging and developing economies grew at an even faster average rate of 6.6% per year, and lastly, the annual average world output growth was about 4.2%. The table shows the output growth rates for the world economy, for advanced economies, and for emerging and developing countries separately since the year 2000. The crisis. By 2007, signs that the expansion might be coming to an end started to appear as economies showed signs of slowdown. When looking at the housing market in the US, the house prices started to decline, and with declining house prices, it no longer covered home loans, giving them an incentive to default on the loan. From the bank's perspective, and here banks generally refers to banks and other financial institutions, banks that had issued the home loans had often bundled the loans into packages, and these packages were sold as securities. These securities were so complex and it made value assessment impossible. As a result, banks' distrust of each other grew, which led to a major bank known as the Lehman Brothers to collapse, meaning that they went bankrupt. Complexity made other bankruptcies possible. The crisis. In the US, the decline in house prices caused share prices to collapse. Figure 1.1 is shown on slide 7. The decrease in house prices and the collapse in share prices caused consumers to sharply cut consumption, interest rates were cut down to 0%, taxes were cut, and government spending increased. The collapse of share prices. Figure 1.1 plots the evolution of three share price indexes for the United States, the Euro area, and for emerging economies. The vertical axis represents the indexes, and the horizontal axis represents the years from the beginning of 2007 to 2010. Note how by the end of 2008, about here, by the end of 2008, share prices has lost half or more of their value from the previous peak. Also note that despite the fact that the crisis originated in the United States, European and emerging market share prices decreased by much as their US counterparts. Continuing with the crisis, so what we have gathered is that in the US, the decline in house prices caused share prices to collapse. Consumers sharply cut consumption, interest rates were cut to 0%, taxes were cut, and government spending increased. So the question is, why was this the policy reaction? To answer the question, During the Great Depression in 1929 until 1939, the government believed in a laissez-faire economics. Laissez-faire implies that the government does not interfere in the economy. John Maynard Keynes developed new theories that government intervention could help, and this theory ultimately ended the Great Depression. For more information on this and John Maynard Keynes, see Chapter 25. Continuing with the crisis, the hope was that the crisis would remain largely in the US. However, other countries were affected, and they were affected through two channels. The first channel was trade. Since US consumers and firms consumed less, it decreased imports and exports. The second channel was financial. Financial links of US banks to international banks spilled over to other countries. For a look at the crisis and South African banks, see Baxter 2008, The Global Economic Crisis and its Impact on South Africa and the Country's Mining Industry, Conference Papers of the South African Reserve Bank, and it's available on the link below. The crisis in the rest of the world. Growth in advanced economies declined to an average of negative 3.4%. Developing and emerging market economics growth remained positive but slowed significantly, and Table 1.1 shows the world output growth since 2000. South African macroeconomic conditions. When economists first look at a country, the first two questions they ask are, number one, how big is the country from an economic view? And number two, what is the standard of living? To answer number one, they look at total output, the level of production of the country, so GDP. And to answer the second one of what is the standard of living, they look at output per person. South Africa. In 2012, total output was at 3.1 trillion rand, and that is about $384.3 billion. The output per person was at 61,783 rand. You can also Google the more recent years total output and output per person. South Africa has a small open economy in comparison to economic powers such as the United States. South Africa is also a unique developing country with a dual economic system. On the one hand, it has well-developed infrastructure and financial sector underpinned by a world-class prudential and regulatory framework. But in contrast, the country has high socio-economic backlogs such as high levels of unemployment, poverty, and unskilled labor. To add to this, it is also one of the most unequal countries in the world. Key indicators to study in order to look at the health of a country is number one, output growth, the rate of change of output, number two, the unemployment rate, the proportion of workers in the economy who are not employed and who are looking for a job, and number three, the inflation rate, the rate at which the average price level in the economy is increasing over time. South Africa's key statistics. Statistics for the three variables for the South African economy are given in Table 1.2. Also remember that this is taken from the first edition of the ECO232 textbook. The second column gives you the average value of the rate of growth of output, the unemployment rate and the inflation rate in South Africa for the period 1980 to 1999. The next set of columns look at more recent years, giving average numbers for the period 2000 to 2007 and then numbers for each year from 2008 to 2014. We can see that output growth improved to approximately 4.3% on average between 2000 and 2007, with inflation on average remaining in the South African Reserve Bank's target range of between 3.6% and 5.3%. Little headway was made with regard to the high unemployment, since the country is struggling with an unemployment rate of around 25% since 2000. And even today in 2021, South Africa is still struggling with a very high unemployment rate. The United States. United States in 2012 had an output of $16.2 trillion, and the output per person in 2012 was at $51,704. This value also implies that the standard of living is high in the United States. The problems that the United States faced was that it had a very large budget deficit as well as high unemployment as a result of the crisis. Let's look at the United States economic indicators. Looking at the first two columns in table 1.3, you can see why in 2007, just before the crisis, economists felt good about the US economy. Importantly, the average unemployment rate since 2000 was 5%, which is substantially lower than in the previous 20 years. Inflation was low at 2.8% on average since 2000, and the rate of growth of the economy since 2000 was 2.7%. Then the crisis came, and you can see it in the numbers from 2008 onwards. Output did not grow in 2008 and declined by 2.8% in 2009. Unemployment increased dramatically to 9.6% in 2010. Inflation declined, being slightly negative in 2009 and then staying positive but low since then. So due to time constraints, I have to cut this video here. However, I will make part 2 of chapter 1. Thank you.